One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
For 13 tumultuous years, Martin Luther King led Black America's fight for civil rights. Today, his memorial is visited by hundreds of people every day. In death, he's become an American hero. The American South, where black people can't easily forget that as recently as the 1960s, they lived in a society which treated them as an inferior race of beings.
Life for black people, not just for a few, but for all of us, was a humiliating, embarrassing situation day by day by day. It meant that you could only deal with menial jobs. You were the last hired, the first to be fired. You had to even step off the sidewalk for white people to walk by for no other reason they were white.
Across the entire southeast of America, the old Confederate states, generations of white people had been brought up to assume their racial superiority. When slavery was abolished in 1865, the southern states passed local laws imposing racial segregation on almost every area of life. As recently as 30 years ago, these laws were still being enforced with the help of militant white racist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. For many Southerners, white supremacy was more than a way of life, it was a religion.
You knew that they were reared to dislike you, reared to demean you, reared to think that they were superior to you and you were less than for no other reason than color.
There were white farmers with 50 and 100 black families that lived on that farm. And if you made that white farmer angry, he would beat your wife. If you said something, he would kill you. And many blacks did get killed. Lynching blacks back in those days was not something unusual.
Martin Luther King was born in the racially segregated city of Atlanta, Georgia, in 1929. His parents were prosperous by black standards and were leaders in the local community. His father was the preacher at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he spoke out frequently against racism. Martin Luther King was a hard-working, bright schoolboy. He won a scholarship to university. There he heard about the Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi, who 10 years earlier had turned non-violent protest into a powerful weapon for change. Gandhi was to become one of King's spiritual leaders. In 1954, he followed in his father's footsteps and became a Baptist minister. His first job was in the southern town of Montgomery, Alabama. King found the black people of Montgomery full of discontent. It overflowed in December 1955 when a well-known black woman, Rosa Parks, was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Under Alabama's bus laws, black people were expected to stand if there weren't enough seats for whites. The city's black leaders called on people to stop using the buses. Martin Luther King was among them.
He said if we could just get about 50 or 60% of the Negroes of Montgomery not to ride buses, this would be an effective boycott.
We all first heard Martin Luther King at the same time because the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama was the most important thing that happened in black America for decades.
Let me urge you to be sane and rational. Eventually, segregation in public transportation will pass away. Eventually. And I think we should start now preparing for the inevitable.
The young preacher was learning to be an orator. He emerged as the leader of the boycott. Hundreds of black people walked to work. They called it walking for freedom. As the boycott spread, the bus company faced bankruptcy. There were attacks on black leaders. Martin Luther King's home was bombed. But the protests remained peaceful and the authorities were unsure how to respond. Tension rose. Montgomery attracted national media attention. The American government could no longer ignore it. After 11 months, the Supreme Court stepped in and declared Alabama's bus laws illegal. It was an historic victory.
Every black person in this nation knew we had a new strategy, a new method, a new way of doing things. There was a great awakening. All of that anger could now be changed into very positive action and activity. We were alive people.
Martin Luther King was 27, the rising star of a movement hungry for change. The civil rights movement spread across the southern states. There were campaigns of peaceful civil disobedience against segregation in schools, restaurants, and buses. In 1963, Martin Luther King took the movement to Birmingham in Alabama, a stronghold of white racism. He calculated that if the civil rights movement could win there, it could win anywhere.
Birmingham, Alabama had the most violent atmosphere. In fact, we called it Bombingham because that was the method they used to intimidate black people. They would bomb your house, bomb your churches, bomb anything that black people owned.
King told his followers that peaceful protests would shame America into change. The demonstrations became a trial of strength between the forces of non-violence and the city's sheriff, Bull Connor. Wave after wave of protesters took to the streets. The police responded with increasing violence.
I was there when that big march took place, and they marched down and they met Bull Connor. He beat us down to the ground and arrested everybody. He took those water hoses, and they were so powerful it flipped people over, it broke their ribs.
Young people would start down the street and they'd turn the hoses on them, and those hoses just pinned them to the wall. Just pinned them to the wall. They couldn't move any further.
But the protesters refused to fight back. The police grew desperate.
And that's when they sucked those dogs and they bit plugs out of people's body. By that time, this man, Bull Connor, obviously realized it's a power here I can't compete with. So he starts praying, don't bring me no more niggas, don't bring me no more niggas.
The television pictures of peaceful demonstrators facing violent police shocked the American public, as King knew they would. Public opinion across the country turned against the city authorities. Birmingham's political leaders were forced to call a truce, and within weeks they'd agreed to desegregate the city's public buildings. It was another huge victory. Later that year, civil rights leaders, encouraged by their success, organized a giant march on Washington. A 250,000 people came to support new legislation which would outlaw racial segregation across the country.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream today.
In 1964, the United States government passed the Civil Rights Act, the first piece of civil rights legislation for nearly 100 years. It was now illegal throughout the country to discriminate against anybody on the basis of the color of their skin. Martin Luther King had become the undisputed leader of the black civil rights movement. Later that year, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
The Nobel Peace Prize.
But the war was not over. In many parts of the American South, black people were still being denied the right to vote, a gaping hole in the new civil rights legislation. The next battle was about to begin. In 1965, the civil rights leaders went to Selma, a small town in Alabama, typical of many southern towns, where black people were being denied the right to vote.
I led a group down to City Hall to vote. And they met me on the courthouse steps. And Sheriff Clark and I had an encounter there.
Sheriff Clark. And as sheriff of this county, if you're deeply concerned, you will go call.
I'm trying to explain to him, and he turns his back on me, and I'm telling him, you can turn your back on me, Sheriff Clark, but you can't turn your back on justice.
You can turn your back now and you can keep the club in your hand, but you cannot beat down justice.
Finally, he turned and hit me and knocked me down the steps into the street. I got up off that pavement and I asked him, what kind of people are you that you will beat people rather than let them vote in a democratic society?
You Phoenix would refuse to register. What kind of people are you?
Civil rights campaigners were thrown into jail. Martin Luther King, by now skilled at attracting public attention, announced a march from Selma through Alabama to the state capitol in Montgomery to draw attention to the situation. It was immediately banned by the Alabama authorities. The stage was set for confrontation. The march was led by Hosea Williams.
We marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and we got over the bridge. George Wallace, the governor, had his head of state police, and they said, halt! And so we stopped. He said, take those niggers back home. And I tell you, it was like facing Adolf Hitler, honest to God. Finally, I got enough guard in me, enough strength. I mean, it took a lot. My voice was quivering. I said, sir, maybe I have a word with you? He said, no, there'll be no talking today. You got 2 minutes to take them niggas back. And the true God came through me. And I said, sir, there'll be no going back. The day of going back is over. He told those policemen, charge! And they beat us. I mean, they had big billy clubs, and they beat women, children, everybody down to the ground. And then they gassed us. The gas was so thick you couldn't see your hand that far in front of your face. Blood flowed like water in a gutter.
There was nationwide support for the Selma demonstrators and calls for government action. 2 days later, Martin Luther King, aware his presence would attract the media, led a second march. Again, they came face to face with a police cordon.
We are here to say that this march does not continue. You are ordered to stand where you are.
In a gesture of peaceful defiance, the marchers knelt to pray before retreating.
And in the black belt of rubber.
King was criticized by some in the movement for leading them into what seemed a humiliating climb down. But he told them that if they met violence with violence, they'd lose public sympathy. The American government was embarrassed into action, and a week later a court in Washington overruled the Alabama authorities and decreed the march should go ahead. 2 weeks after the first bloody battle of Selma, Martin Luther King led 30,000 people peacefully over the Edmund Pettus Bridge on the road to Montgomery. 4 months later, in August 1965, the United States government passed a Voting Rights Act guaranteeing all adults, black and white, the right to vote. The segregation laws of the southern states had been smashed. Black people had won their civil rights through non-violent protest. But to white people who believed in racial segregation and white superiority, Martin Luther King had destroyed a way of life they passionately believed in. Some swore revenge. By 1968, Martin Luther King seemed to sense he was living on borrowed time.
I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
The next day, as he stood on the balcony of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee, he was shot dead. His assassin was a white racist called James Earl Ray, who was later sentenced to 99 years in prison. Rioting broke out in cities across America as black people gave vent to their anger. Martin Luther King was buried in his hometown of Atlanta. He left behind a movement which had won the battle for equality in the eyes of the law, but is still fighting for a better deal for black people in American society.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when we let it ring, we will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty.